Hi everyone, Lisa and Dan here from Fireside Strategic. We're on a mission to help business leaders achieve great results through human-centered strategy. In the Fireside Chat series, we're showcasing how leaders unite strategic and human thinking and leadership and are transcending the challenges of COVID-19 and beyond. Right now, we're excited to chat with Jenn Leblanc, author of 2 books about how to build successful businesses and founder and CEO of the Changing Tide movements and Think Results Marketing. Jenn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
So we've spoken in the past, and you have an incredible story of how you've gotten all these incredible titles and accolades. Would you mind just giving us a brief walkthrough who you are and what your journey has been?
Okay. So as we did talk about before in the past, so basically I started out with my career as a scientist, which, was surprising. People know what I do now. They're like, huh? But I actually did research in the Great Lakes in Canada before I moved to the US. And then when I came here, I sort of I did science writing for a while, and I wrote for Discovery Channel Online, and I wrote for the local UC Davis Medical Center doctors and all this fun stuff, and tried to get more water into Putah Creek Council for the salmon, and it was great stuff. And then I moved to the Bay Area, and that's all tech, and I sort of fell into technology, doing tech marketing, and loved it, absolutely loved it, because I realized, oh my God, this is great. It's just like when I was a scientist. I get to sit with these super brilliant people. I get to pick their brains and figure out, well, why do you want the product to do that? What's that going to do for the customer? And really get inside their minds about what they were creating, why it was exciting, what was challenging, what was easy for them, and then take all of that information, most of which I didn't ever share with the rest of the world, but translate that to the rest of the world about why this was an awesome new product and you should buy it, basically. And I love doing that. And then also later I started working with biotech folks and pharma folks. And so kind of got back to my biology roots and got to sit with scientists and researchers and say, tell me about what you're working on. Tell me what's interesting. Tell me what you're looking for, really looking for. And then use that to create really solid marketing and positioning for my clients. So that's what I've been doing for like the last 20 years. I love it because, like I said, I have the privilege of sitting with the most brilliant minds in the world and literally just soaking up what they're doing and turning that into something the rest of the world can actually understand. So I do that. And then as a part of that, I really was focusing on, because a lot of our work is launching companies, products, services. And so really wanted to understand why it is that, for example, in tech marketing, 92% of high tech companies fail. For other launches, it's like somewhere between 35 and 55% of launches fail. So as a scientist, I'm like, okay, if some are successful and some are not, there must be some defining characteristics. What are those? And it is not the quality of the technology, for sure, because there's a lot of terrible technology on the market and there's a lot of great technology that's not seen the light of day. So that is not what it is. I thought, okay, so I stapled myself to that problem for like the last 20 years, just trying to understand what's the difference. How do we make sure that we are in that top 8% that are successful, or the 45% that are successful for non-tech companies? And how do we really make sure that that's reality for our clients? So we looked at marketing research. We did our own research. We looked at all the things we've done for clients and their outcomes, and we looked at outcomes of companies that were successful in their product launches and not successful. And through that came to the realization that there is a formula. There are 10 steps, there are 10 elements to think about. And that became Launching for Revenue, the book Launching for Revenue, because once I realized that there was basically a framework and a step-by-step process, I'm like, I have got to get this out to all these companies that are creating great stuff but are not getting it to market. We need to get out there to help them. And then in the midst of writing Launching for Revenue, I had sort of an epiphany, because Me Too essentially happened in Silicon Valley before it happened in Hollywood. And I realized that my female founders that I've been working with, even if they did everything right, they may not be successful. So I had to create a second book, long story, but so then I wrote Changing Tides, which is a collection of stories from female founders, female VCs, angels, ecosystem partners, lawyers, to really look at the problem of why is it that women get 2% of funding, VC funding, and make up 9% of VCs, partners who are actually signing checks. And really, how do we really change that tide, essentially, look at the issue, create a world in which that becomes much more smooth and possible for female founders to be successful. So that's how I ended up here today.
Wow. It's a long, long journey. So many different facets we could dig into, but I'm curious because you just wrote a book on it. Why is it that women are only 9% of partners in VCs and are raising, did you say, only 2% of VC funding?
2% of VC funding goes to women, and if it's a woman of color, it's like 0.00. It's so small, it's not even measurable practically. So it's really a implicit bias. You know, the VC world is very much a warm introduction world. So, you know, those folks that get pulled in to be associates and analysts and then get to be partners tend to look like the VCs that already exist. So that's essentially the reason for that. There's a huge increase now, though, in female-founded funds, like actually founded by women, not necessarily for female founders. And then also a lot of new funds that are founded, that are created just for female founders or underrepresented funders in general. There's just a plethora of those that are happening over the last couple of years, which is fantastic and such great news. Because the other piece that people I think they're starting to realize, is investing in diverse founders and underrepresented founders is not only a good thing to do, it's smart business, because those founders tend to outperform dramatically over more traditionally funded companies. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the research from McKinsey and, you know, about diverse teams and diverse boards do better financially on the corporate level, but that's also true for startups. And if you think about it, those companies that have, you know, fought, one of the key things about being an entrepreneur is having grit. So if you have fought through to the point where you're actually seeking VC funding as an underrepresented funder, you are probably by definition the very definition of grit. So you have those great entrepreneurial skills because it's been an incredibly difficult path for you to even get into that office to seek funding.
I love that. What a beautiful time between your two worlds. Kind of the first being, what does it take to be a successful startup? And what are some of the challenges that women and other minorities kind of deal with? And I love how like these two are united by that concept of grit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very true. And, you know, one of the things somebody asked me recently, so we have these groups called Changing Tide Circles within the program, one of the programs we offer. And so it's small groups of women, 8 to 10 women. We get together once a month and we teach some of the research and findings that came out of Changing Tides to our female founders, and then create essentially, you know, a small circle of connected women and then more small circles. And, you know, the vision for me is that we'll eventually have a fantastically connected women's economy that's supporting each other. But somebody asked me, you know, what are you teaching in those circles that you wouldn't teach, say, to a male founder? And I said, you know, we just did a segment on, you know, developing your ideal investor list, for example. And I said, one of the things that women need to think about, female founders need to think about, that men don't need to think about is, you know, we had a fairly lengthy conversation about, you know, when a male investor keeps asking you to have dinner and is not having the meeting during the day, you need to come back to us, to your sisters, and talk about that, because that's probably a problem. And the guy who asked me the question was like, okay, yeah, like never in all my years of raising money has anyone ever asked me to have dinner or drinks at the hotel. And I said, exactly. So they're already doing this super hard thing of no, 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 yes, no, 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 yes, as they're trying to raise money. They're also having to fend off potential predators in the process. It's just supremely tough on top of tough. Mm-hmm. Right? So those are the kinds of things that we do talk about. We're talking about the basic things that all founders need to know, but there's always this additional sort of layer that we have to add on for our female founders. And then female founders get asked very different kinds of questions than male founders do. So we teach them how to turn those questions around, which according to the research means that they will raise 14 times more funding simply by how they answer their questions. That's phenomenal information. Right? So that's the kind of things that we teach in our classes, in our circles, so that they not only get kind of the basics that they need and every founder needs, but kind of the unique things that they also need to think about.
That is so fascinating. If we were to, in this sort of short form interview format, if you were to summarize what it is in that approach that you taught that enables them to get such fantastic results, how would you describe what you're teaching that enables them to achieve that?
So the research came out of Dr. Dana Kanzi, who's now at London Business School. And basically it showed that male founders, 67% of the time, get asked promotion-oriented questions. What's your vision for the company? How do you think you're going to expand your market share? Things that we normally associate with entrepreneurship. And then 66% of the time, women get asked prevention-oriented questions. How are you going to protect against churn? I had one female founder actually get asked, so did you really write that patent?
Oh.
And she had 5 patents. So, those are the kind of questions that women get asked, right? That men don't get asked. And research shows this. But if you can turn that question around, so for example, let's say market churn, right? You can either answer it head on and say, market churn in our industry is typically X percentage. This is our percentage. Or you can just avoid the question. You can do the political thing, just not answer the question as asked, right? And you can say, this is such a fast growing market that we're really focused on growing the market. And here's how we're going to do that. And if you answer basically a prevention-oriented question and you turn that around into a promotion-oriented answer, you will raise, according to the research, 14 times more funding. That's phenomenal, just by simple, switch.
What's interesting, it to me reminds me of some of the latest neuroscience research on coaching that shows you can engage either the default mode network or the task positive network of the brain. And so there's a part of our brain that is wired to not just make us averse to risk, but to make us just fearful in general. And when you can instead ask questions, right, or make statements that speak to the task positive network part of the brain, there is an openness. You're essentially moving people in the direction of openness.
Right. Exactly. So that's essentially what that's doing, is taking them away from, because an investor, I'm going to give money as an investor and I may lose it, right? So there's fear. There's a lot of fear. And frankly, most investments fail. That's why it's high risk, high reward. So investors are very fearful. So that's kind of where they're coming from. And if you move them into that sort of more open, positive approach, which is what we more typically associate with entrepreneurial traits, by the way, then that founder is seen more as a good bet, right? So it's totally in line with that research. Exactly. It's just kind of a different approach in terms of how it gets put together, but it's essentially doing exactly that within the minds of the investors.
I love it. You're so knowledgeable about this space, and I love that you're using kind of your background, your knowledge, your scientific method thinking to helping solve this problem and really building a whole movement. I'd love to learn just a little bit more about the Changing Tides movement. I know you have the book. I know you've already talked about the circles. Could you give us an idea a little bit more broadly around kind of what is the Changing Tides movement, and what are you trying to build?
So what is that is a good question. I mean, honestly, very much so. This has been from the beginning. I never planned to do this. This has been very much a member and female founder driven approach. So for example, when COVID hit mid-March, my female founders came to me kind of with look on their faces, right? One of my female founders had a travel business based in Italy. Ouch. Right. Another one had a, menu restaurant thing in Spain. Ouch. So yeah, super painful because they were in the most high risk situations. Another one had a business that was for tracking kids in amusement parks. Tanked. So we just kind of on the spur of the moment, I said, let's just do a happy hour. I don't know what we're going to do here, but we're just going to have a happy hour. So, Tuesdays, 5 to 6:30 Pacific time, let's just get together. Well, there was a lot of crying and a lot of drinking on that first call, I gotta say. It was I think March, 12 something, and kind of mid-March.
It's March.
Oh, it was bad. It was bad. And then we said, you know what, this has been so, by the end of it, everyone felt like community connection, like that we were kind of brainstorming and co-creating on their businesses and how to kind of turn, especially the ones that were really, really hurting bad, in an hour and a half. And so I said, okay, we just need to keep doing this, because I have to say, I did the happy hour because I wanted to do it for them. By the end of that call, I was filled with such hope, and I was practically in tears several times. I'm trying to think about it, but the resilience and the grit and the determination in the face of like zero odds for some of these women, I was like, oh my God. I was filled with such hope that I said, let's just keep doing this every week. It's fantastic. So we've been doing it every week. It's a free thing. We just get together, and we usually have someone come in kind of to do a little bit of questions. So like last week we had an IP lawyer, and we'll talk about data privacy, and we'll talk about how to handle co-founder issues, and kind of a little bit of ask me anything style. So it's just a really relaxed time for female founders to come together, let their hair down, and have a gin and tonic. Some people call in at 5 o'clock in the morning, so they're drinking coffee. Some people call in at 2 o'clock in the morning from Spain, so they're drinking their warm milk. But we do that every week, and it's just a great opportunity for us to connect with each other. And for me, I get a pulse on kind of what's happening. And by the way, 2 out of 3 of those businesses are now doing 10 times better than they were before COVID. One of them just shut down. She's just like, I just can't. But now she's created an app that's tracking for restaurants what they need to be doing, and public businesses, right, that have customers, what they need to be doing in terms of cleaning, and then what they need to be doing in terms of the schedule for that cleaning, and then having that be public facing. So she's basically created a brand new business out of thin air. So amazing stories of being able to just, like, literally for the first few weeks, we looked at all the cards on the floor and said, well, that's kind of a mess. and what else do you say? Like, there was a terrible situation for many of these businesses, and then they've just created brand new or completely pivoted businesses out of a complete mess of cards and disaster on the floor. Mm. So great thing. So that's one thing that we do is the happy hours. We also have an event coming up in November. Can't announce who's going to be there, but we have some awesome speakers that are going to be there in November. So we're doing an all-day event, virtual. We have Microsoft hosting us and a few other sponsors coming up, and that will be all day for female founders, whether you're a beginning female founder or you're more experienced. And we have yoga, and we have meditation, and we have a drag queen, and we have all kinds of fun stuff happening throughout the day. So that's in November. And we also have a webinar program, and we have a weekly newsletter. So we have a number of ways that we're trying to get resources and information out to our female founders and support them in being more successful with their businesses.
Awesome. Remarkable work. Have a question for you, but before the question, a little reflection on what is special about Jenn Leblanc. A thread that I'm seeing through your career is not starting out with the end in mind, but starting out with a deep curiosity and problem-solving instinct, right? So in the case of tech founding, you never set out with that end in mind. You just kind of found some cool people. You were super curious, so you asked a bunch of questions, right? And then you helped from that standpoint. And I see the same at work with the Female Founders Project, right? You show up curious and so wonderfully unwilling to sort of force your vision on things. You just let it unfold so beautifully and naturally, which is super cool.
That is very true. People always say that to me. When I was younger, they'd say, curiosity killed the cat. I'd be like, whatever. My curiosity has never killed me, and it got me in trouble sometimes, but it has been very interesting where it has led me. So I kind of go with that. I mean, I have a vision. My mission really is to drive massive amounts of capital into the hands of women. But how we do that, I let them tell me what they need, and then I go figure out how to bring that to them.
What do you think from your standpoint, and this is perfect, like, segue to what I was going to ask, from where you sit now, what do you think are the next steps for you to move that ball forward?
So I think we still have a fair distance to go on the investor side. But I did, for example, I saw this tweet stream this weekend that and I have to go back and find who said it, but somebody said, if you're not investing in underrepresented founders, you're a bad investor. I thought, hallelujah, we have made some changes here. I think that is the place where we really need to make the change, right? If you pour a bunch of money into a company, the chances are higher that they're going to be successful than if you let them starve with no money. So we need to start putting more money in the right places with the right kinds of solutions and services and products that we want to see in this world. It's why I became an investor myself this year, because I'm like, I need to be able to, do this work and be part of this work. We need a lot more women to be investors and a lot more woke guys to be investors, to really look across at diverse founders and the solutions they're creating. That, I think, will change what we're doing. So right now I'm working with both sides of that coin, but over time I'd like to be doing more. And I'm, lately been like, hey, you angel fund and you VC fund need to talk to each other because they have similar goals. They don't know each other. So doing those kinds of connections to build the investor network much stronger, because that I think is key.
I love that. That's such an important mission. I think I love how you're combining, you're really bringing in that scientific method into everything you do. Your science background really informs the way that you work and the way that you're helping create this, sounds a very powerful movement.
Thank you. Well, definitely you cannot take the science out of the scientist. That's for sure. Once that's been put in your mind, it's sort of, how you approach, all problems, like, this is happening and this is happening. Why are they different? Just asking questions, that curiosity. So why is that? And what was that experience like? And how can we fix that? And what do you think? And lots and lots of questions and conversations with folks leads to sort of, oh, I'm seeing a recurring theme here, right? Maybe we should tackle this problem because I'm hearing this over and over again.
Love it. So we talked quite a bit about the Changing Tides movement, the Changing Tides book. I did want to touch very briefly on launching for revenue. I think you said something that sparked quite a bit of curiosity in me and probably will in our audience as well, that there are some clear steps that companies can take to not be the majority that fails. Would you mind just giving us a little bit more of an insight around, like, what are these steps? Is it really that clear? Like, what does that look like?
It seems to be, but somebody is welcome to prove me wrong. I'm always open to new data. So really, the launching for revenue goes through what we see as the 10 elements that are necessary for success. So it starts with the offering, which is your product or service. Frankly, that has to work, but it's not usually the defining factor, right? Like we talked about, some businesses have terrible technology, like they're successful despite their product, and then some never make it to market, even though they have great products, right? Because the timing was wrong or whatever was wrong. Then it goes through things like your positioning. Frankly, I will tell you that is where I think results most commonly see a problem, is people have very, very weak or undifferentiated positioning that just falls flat. It doesn't accurately capture the value of what they really offer to the market, and so people don't ever get it. It's not compelling enough. And then it goes through tactical things like your name. I mean, there's some very unfortunate names out there. Name, your logo, your website, your content strategy, your sales strategy, your social strategy, I mentioned that one, funding, your team, kind of all of those elements, and basically gives you guidance on here's what to do, here's what not to do. Because for me, I find it helpful, like, don't go there. Especially with logos, there's some very famous logos that would never get approved on my desk for a startup because they're just way too complicated. But if you put $5 billion of advertising behind them, sure, you can make them work, but I wouldn't start there. So there's what to do, what not to do. There's checklists, there's self-assessments. And most of my founders that have worked with the book, they literally just kind of dive in and out between chapters. It's not meant to be like you sit down and you read it. It's meant to be a workbook and a guide and a reference. So if you're really struggling with your sales strategy, you just jump into that chapter and work with that. If you're really struggling with your logo because you're at the beginning, then there's lots of examples in the logo chapter to look at, or your social strategy, whatever it may be that's kind of where you're at. You can kind of jump around based on whatever your needs are. So that's the 10 elements of making sure you have those. You don't need everyone to be 10 out of 10, but you need to have most of them be fairly strong. So once you've done going through all the self-assessments, you get a sense of where you have strength and where you might need to shore up a little before you launch. So that's essentially the process.
And for our readers, would you mind letting us know kind of what are some of the social media channels and websites where they can follow you and maybe see the books?
Right. So you can find all of the stuff about Launching for Revenue. Actually, both books are on jennifersleblanc.com because there's a novelist who writes romantic novels. We'll leave it at that. So Jennifer S, as in Susan, LeBlanc.com. And then Think Results Marketing, there's also all the information about how we do work with clients from a marketing perspective. And then changingtidesmovement.com is where we have all of the information about the Changing Tides stuff. But those are also all interrelated. So you can kind of get to one, get to all of them from one. But those are the 3 places to find more information about us. And then both books are available on Amazon. And any female founders out there, we would love to have you at Happy Hour because it's a free program every Tuesday, 5 to 6:30. We have a different female founder who is our host every week. So it's fantastic because I get to shine a spotlight every week on a new female founder or ecosystem partner, which I love. In fact, one of our female founders got connected to an investor because she was a host, and the investor saw her name on my social feed and said, "Hey, I'm interested in that space. Can you connect me to that founder?" So magic happens that way.
Very cool. Very cool. And last question for you, Jen, as we wrap up, we always like to ask people, it's a tricky moment. There's lots of challenging things happening in the world. How are you having fun to keep things light?
Oh, walking on the beach with my dog. That is definitely my, when you get to the end of the day and you're like, I have to do 17 more things and you're kind of like a little panicky. I go out, I walk on the beach and my brain just resets. And I'm good. And I'm like, okay, I really need to do this one thing, but otherwise I can go and have dinner and relax.
Beautiful. Beaches with dogs are the best. Well, look, Jen, thank you so much for all of the incredible insight and for your time. You're so brilliant and so passionate, and I absolutely love what you're building, and I really appreciate all of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for having me. It's been great to get to know both of you.
Thanks.
And I love what you're doing.